Gotcha. All right. How's everyone doing?
Good.
We're going to be jumping around the Bible today if you want to follow along. Otherwise, I'm just going to read stuff to you. So it is truly your call. I want to start by, I know Brad's not here, but his wife is, so thank you for allowing me to be here today.
Thank you for coming.
Well, my pleasure. So your little bulletin there told that I am a teacher. I am a math teacher, so it's different to have a bunch of adults as opposed to kids. But I like the adults maybe a little bit better. They don't have to have so many distractions. I don't know if you know middle school these days, like they're all about fads, right? So the guys like to jump in the halls to see how high they can jump. They can touch the roof, so I get that a lot. And then everything they see on TikTok or stuff, I hear that all day long. So hopefully you're not as fatty, not fatty, F-A-D, it's fatty to where you're going to be doing all the same stuff that I get in class. So, but I love my job. So, all right. I'm going to start out by telling you a story, if that's all right. So, I had a cat back in the day. I have cats now too, but I had a cat back in the day. His name was Stuart. And I trained my cat to listen for the clicker. Right? So my cat, once he got past the initial, what are you doing? And understood that there was food on the other end of the click here, he would come running around, right? From wherever he was. We had about 3 acres at the time. And so I would click this from our little mobile home, and he'd come running out of wherever he was and bounced his way up to the house and would eat. But it took him some time to get to the point where he could be trained, right? At first, like I said, he looked at me like, what do you want me to do with this? But once he finally got the understanding of the click, he still responded in one of 3 ways. Most of the times when he heard the click, he would come running, right? Like I said, it took some time. But other times, he would be out in the field and he would kind of like not respond, right? No matter how many times I clicked it, he would not respond. And I kind of took it upon myself to believe that those are the times when he decided that he was just going to live off the land, right? Because we had field mice and all that out there. So I figured he's just going to live off the land. He's going to do his own little thing there. Whatever. I clicked. I tried to get you to come, but you're not responding. And then there were other times, and we only had about 3 acres, like I said. So I could see if he was out there sometimes if he was responding. And so I'd click other times, and you would see like this little head pop up. And then he would just kind of go do his own little thing again, but almost as if he was like looking at me like, you want me to do what? You want me to come up there and get this food? You need to bring it to me, peasant boy. Right? Cats are like that. They just suspect that you're going to bow down to them. So what was interesting, though, is this really does explain how we react when God speaks to us. So my message title today is When God Speaks. And I'm going to make illustrations to my cat as we go through the message here. But I want to start with the preface here, asking you, as we go through this message, I'm going to give you the challenge ahead of time. Think about how you respond when God speaks to you. But in order for us to understand that piece, we first have to be in agreement. How many believe that God does speak to us still? Yeah. So, and it could be an audible voice. It could be maybe he speaks to us through his word. There's been plenty of times when I'm reading the Bible, and sure enough, something pops up. I'm like, I've read this passage so many times, and all of a sudden it pops up as if it's brand new, and that's God speaking to me. And then there's times when I hear a song on the radio. Right? I know for a couple of years back when that song from Mercy Me, Even If, came out, I was at a point where I was like, man, I don't know why all these terrible things keep happening. It feels like it's just bummer after bummer after bummer. And then that song came on, and it talks about even if I'm having a bad day, even if things don't go right, even if the world is falling apart, I'm still going to praise God. And for me, that was like, oh, man, I needed that. God, I need that reminder that even though things are not going the way that I want it to go, you're still in control. You're still in charge. Thank you for that. Thank you for speaking to me through that song. There's times when I've been driving down the road and I see a billboard, and that billboard will speak out to me. There's times that I've had dreams at night, and I wake up and I'm like, man, that wasn't a pizza dream. There's something there, right? And so I began to pray about this dream, and I realized that God was speaking to me through this dream. And I could tell you some stories. I tell you, I'm not going to get into them, but I could tell you some stories where I know for a fact that God gave me, just like in the Bible, God gave me like a vision of what was coming, and then within the next couple of days it actually happened, right? So I know that God speaks to me in dreams. I know that God speaks through the pastor sometimes. Sometimes, if I'm a little hard-headed and I need someone else to knock on my head for me, God will use the pastor, or he'll use a prophet, or he'll use something to speak, right? So God does speak. So now, here's my next question for you to think about. What do you do when God speaks? Because if I saw the hands come up, so if God speaks, what do we do? How do we respond when God speaks to us? So I'm going to take my first piece of text here from John chapter 10. And I'm going to go to John 10, verse 27. I'm reading now the New Living Translation here. Really short verse. It says, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me." It's interesting because we just sang this song about sheep and the shepherd and all. Right? In fact, there's been a couple things that God has already shown me in the service today, even with David saying a few things here that I'm going to allude back to. But it's like God was kind of setting us up for this moment. All right, so this verse here, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me." Now, I am a self-proclaimed nerd, all right, just so you know. So I've done a lot of research. In fact, when I was in grad school, I wrote a whole paper which turned into a book just on this one verse. That's how nerdy I am. Right? Almost 200 pages just on one verse. I won't bore you with all the details today. But I am going to give you some background on this verse here. I want us to look at some of the words that are mentioned in here. I'm going to talk about it in the in the Greek mindset so that you can understand what Jesus is saying with these words. But first of all, one of my big things is hermeneutics. And if you've not heard this word before, don't get caught up with it. It's just the fancy who, what, when, where, why, and how of the passage that you're reading. So who is Jesus speaking to? Well, he's speaking to the public. He's in Solomon's colonnade, a very public spot when he's saying this. It tells us a couple verses beforehand that this was at the time of Hanukkah. So we're looking at a December time frame during the festival of Hanukkah there, the festival of lights. And we see that later on in this passage, not only is Jesus referring to himself as the shepherd, but he also refers to himself as the light. Kind of makes sense. Jesus always kind of points back to whatever's going around to pull out characteristics of himself, right? And so he's talking about being the light. He's talking about being the shepherd. And he's helping them understand, if you really are a follower of Christ, in essence, the sheep here, then here are the three characteristics. My sheep, what does it say? My sheep hear my voice. They listen to my voice. So this word listen or hear, in the Greek it's the word aku, which is where we get acoustics from, right? So being a choir kid, I used to love when we had good acoustics in the room because it gave us the chance to hear the reverbs, the overtones, everyone's voice were blending well together. Well, in the Greek, this word is defined as to comprehend by hearing, hear properly, to hear God's voice, which prompts us to birth faith within the task. So what Jesus is saying here, the first thing he says is, my sheep hear my voice. My sheep are attuned to my voice. They know my voice. To put this in the form of a shepherd, when a shepherd gets his sheep, if they've not been raised with him, he has to train them to hear his voice, to hear his different clicks, his commands, his sounds. And over the course of time, the sheep will actually begin to move based on the clicks that they hear. It's kind of like the shepherd's voice is a GPS system for the sheep, right? Turn left and 500 feet. Means turn left and 500 feet, right? They know that sound. Or my cat, when he heard the clicker, he knew, hey, let me perk my ears up and hear something. Right? So he was in tune, or the sheep are in tune with the voice. But then the next part says, I know them. And notice the shepherd here is saying, I know my sheep. Well, this word know is the word genisko. It means to know with firsthand knowledge, or even goes more in depth to say to know intimately. When I was dating my wife, I knew her. I knew she was good looking. I knew that her favorite color was this. I knew what kind of food she liked, all this type of stuff. But as I got to spend more time with her, that knowing grew. And then when we eventually got married and got to celebrate our wedding, our marriage night, I knew her in a different way. So it went from just knowing about her to knowing her to knowing her, right? And Jesus is saying the same thing. I know my sheep. I know them. I know my sheep. He knows what we're going to do. He knows the way we're going to move. He knows the little aspects there of how the sheep are going to respond. Right? I now know that my wife doesn't like me to bring her flowers because they die. Right? But back in the dating stage, hey, here's some flowers. You know, thanks. I appreciate it. But really, she's like, these are just going to die in a couple of days, right? All right. Doesn't mean I don't bring them still. But, you know. Then the last part here says, and they follow me. So this is the word aklatheo. And aklatheo basically just means follow. Look at that. And sometimes in the Greek, they actually get it right? So it just means to follow. But how is this following happening? It's happening based on a relationship. It's happening based on the understanding of a voice. It's happening because there is a grounding in knowing that the shepherd is going to keep us safe. Every move that we make, if we follow the voice of the shepherd, it's just like the clicker with the cat. He knows food is on the other end. We know that if we hear God's voice, knowing that he knows us, and obey and follow what he's asking us to do, then there's going to be a blessing on the other end. Now, that doesn't mean that we just do it because of the blessing, right? I'm not saying, hey, you know, if you want to be blessed, da-da-da-da-da. But there is a blessing that comes. So if we know these things, and my cat knew it as well, then why do we put up that smug face and say, hey, you come to me? Or why do we say, I think I'm going to do it this way instead? Food for thought. All right. So know that in this, I'm not pointing any fingers at you because the examples that I'm going to give you today are examples that I can pull stories out of my own life. Right? So, no finger pointing, no shame, nothing like that. We are just having a great conversation about following God. All right. So, let's first look at the obedient people. Right? Again, my cat hears the sound, comes running. 90% of the time, my cat did that. So, who can we look at in the Bible who would be a great example of obedience? Let's look at Abraham in the book of Genesis. So if you would like to go, we're going to go to Genesis chapter 12. I'm going to start in chapter 12, verse 1, read 1 through 4. The Lord said to Abram, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you. So Abram departed as the Lord had instructed, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. All right, so what do we see in this first bit here? We see God calling him. We see the clicker. God has just spoken to Abram. And Abram's first response, we don't read anywhere in here where he said, I don't know about that. We see what? Leave was the command. I will make you into a great nation. And then in verse 4, Abram departed as the Lord had instructed. There was no debate. It was simply just, I'm going to follow. I'm going to trust that God is right. And what he's telling me to do, I'm going to do it. I'm going to live on that faith. In fact, we see this when we look at Hebrews 11:8 says, it was by faith that Abram obeyed when God called him to leave home to another land that God would give him as his inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going. Now, I was sharing in the back there, I did not grow up in this area. was born in California, lived in Oklahoma for a bit, moved to Montana for a bit, lived in Tennessee for 25 years before I finally made it here, right? But when my wife and I, we were in Tennessee for a bit there. She was with me when we got married. And we decided we were going to move back here. And we had the luxury of looking on sites to see, what kind of housing was out there. She had lived here most of her life, so she already knew people. We would come up here, we would visit her family, and when we got to the point where we're going to start moving up here, we did some searching around for different homes and stuff like that. So we had that extra little piece there. We knew what we were looking for. Abram didn't have this. He didn't have Zillow that he could go on to back in his day to see, what's the market look like, how many houses are for sale, are there decent prices, all that type stuff. He simply had God's voice, and he got up and he left. He did exactly what God asked him to do. And, what a great example that we can read here from Abram's life. But we have another example of Abram's life as well, maybe one that's a little bit more intense than just picking up and leaving. If you go over to Genesis 22, we have the very famous story of Abraham at this time having to sacrifice Isaac. And so starting in verse 1 of 22, it says, "Sometime later, God tested Abraham's faith. 'Abraham,' God called. 'Yes,' he replied, 'here I am. Take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the land of Moriah. Go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will show you.' The next morning, Abram got up early. He saddled his donkey and took 2 of his servants with him, along with his son Isaac. Then he chopped wood for the fire for the burnt offering and set out for the place that God had told him about." So again, we see Abraham moving on the direction that God gave. But I want us to park on Abraham's comment, his response. "Here I am." Now in school I took Hebrew, so I know a little bit more Hebrew than I do Greek. But in Hebrew, this word is hineni. And hineni means "here I am," ready to listen, ready to respond, ready to obey. Notice that before Abraham even knew what the task was that God was going to give him, he'd already positioned himself in a position where he was going to be responsive via obedience. And then God says, "I want you to sacrifice your son." It wasn't, "Hey, Abraham, I want you to sacrifice your son." "Okay, here I am." It was, "Here I am. I'm in a position where I'm going to obey whatever you say." Why? Because as the shepherd, you have not led me astray yet. So why would this be a time when he would think anything different? He knew God was going to do what God needed to do. He knew that his position was to be one of obedience. And so he gives this comment, "Here I am, ready to listen, ready to respond, ready to obey." This is not the only time we see this word in Scripture. When Moses is at the burning bush and the bush calls to him, it's the same word. So here's Moses, and he's got this burning bush, and it calls to him, "Moses, Moses." And his response, "Here I am. I'm ready to listen, ready to obey, ready to respond." David read from Isaiah. Isaiah was talking, it's the same thing. Who will go? Who can I send? And Isaiah's response, "Here I am. I'm ready to listen, ready to respond, ready to obey." And the other time we see this is when Samuel is being called as a little lad. And he thinks he hears the priest calling him. And after going back and forth a couple times, Eli says, "Oh, I know what's going on. When you hear that voice again, say, 'Here I am.'" And so sure enough, he hears it again, and Samuel responds, "Here I am, ready to listen, ready to obey, ready to respond." Oh, that would be the way that we respond. What's interesting still about this chapter, you skip down to verse 10 of 22 as well. And Abraham picked up the knife to kill his son as a sacrifice. At that moment, At that moment, the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Yes," Abraham replied, "Here I am." There it is again. Don't lay a hand on the boy, the angel said. Do not hurt him in any way, for now I know that you truly fear God. You have not withheld from me even your son, your only son. Now, I can guarantee you that was probably one of those times where he was, man, I really hope God says something because I'm about to my kid here, right? And here comes this voice. And Abraham's like, oh, here I am. I'm ready to respond, ready to obey, ready to listen. He got the reward because of his obedience. Because it was quick obedience. No questions asked. He did what God was telling him to do. Again, I really wish that would be the way that I respond. I don't know, maybe you guys are better. But I wish that would be the way that I respond. And my cat, like I said, 90% of the time, that's how he responded. But for me, 90% of the time that I respond are the other two ways that we're going to talk about. Right? I'm just being honest with you. I wish that I was quicker, but I'm a little hard-headed. So let's look at the other way that my cat would respond, where he decided that he was going to fend for himself because living off the land was better than, having a dish full of food that he didn't have to work for. All right, so we got plenty of examples of this here as well. I'm going to start out by telling you a little story. Not about me this time. I wish, but no. Okay, between March 29, 1969 to May 10 of 1969, there was one song that peaked itself on the Billboard charts at number 27. But the person who sang this song hated this song. All right? You might know what it is. I'm going to come back to it. Get your little Jeopardy wheels turning there. All right. So the reason he hated this song, the title portrays how clearly a number of us respond to God. And he, in his own personal life, hated it because it made him sound as though he was proud and selfish and defiant. And he hated the way that this song presented him. Even though it was one of his biggest hits, he hated the way that it made him look. All right? Again, here's the problem. Oops, sorry. I'm not used to a mic there. Most of the time, this is how I respond. And as I read these stories, these characters here, man, I feel so terrible, right? And not like, oh, I'm a terrible person. But it's like I can feel the conviction of God on me saying, look, man, I'm using these scriptures to point out to you the areas that I need you to change. So again, there's no shame in this. And I'm not God, please know that. But maybe God's going to use these characters here to kind of get us motivated to say, oh, that's me. I need to stop doing these things. I need to work on being obedient. All right. We just talked about Abraham. And Abraham had a lot of great moments. But there was one time here, specifically, when Abraham decided that he was going to take matters into his own hand. All right? And it's sandwiched in between him leaving the land to follow and him sacrificing his son. So go back with me just a couple chapters to Genesis 16. And I'll help paint the stage here for you. So in chapter 15:4, Abraham is promised, or Abram at this point, is promised a son. The years have been going by. He's not getting any younger, and he's not getting any more arrows in his quiver, so to say. Right? And so Sarah, his wife, or Sarai at this time, says, hey, I got an idea. Why don't you take Hagar and make your family through her? Now, I've often asked this question. I don't know which one was the craziest. The one that says, hey, go ahead and take my servant girl and make a family through her, or the one who said, hey, that's a good idea, I think I'll do it. Right? Because you got Sarah saying, go ahead and do it, and you got Abraham saying, yeah, why not? Which one was crazier? I don't know. But in that moment, they're probably both crazy, right? All right. But Abram at this point still, goes ahead and does this. He has Ishmael. And it's not the son that God had promised. It actually causes a lot of trouble. Even to this day, it still causes a lot of trouble, right? If you look at the different tribes there, if you follow how history goes, really it comes down to still a war between those who are from Ishmael and those who are from Isaac. All right. But now we have in chapter, where was I going? Chapter 16, where again, Abraham is agreeing to this and said, and so I'm going to start in verse 1. Now Sarai, Abraham's wife, had not been able to bear children for him. She had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "The Lord has prevented me from having children. Go ahead and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her." And Abram agreed with Sarai's proposal. All right, so again, this was not God's perfect plan. This was what they decided to do to kind of help speed God's process there. And there have been many times in my life when I have decided I was going to speed God's process. So I've only been a teacher for 4 years. Before that, I did medical insurance. I worked through this big company out in Tennessee. And I did that for 18 years. And I was getting a little restless, right? Especially during COVID. During COVID, I thought, I had this great idea. Let's go back to school, right? And let's go back for education. Because I've always wanted to be a teacher. I kind of just took these other jobs because that's what was paying the bills. But I had this moment, and you can ask my wife, when I decided, I'm just going to quit my job. So I wrote this nice little email to my boss, and I sent it, and she was awed, A-W, right? Because I'm like, out of nowhere, I decided I'm gonna quit. And so I go to bed that night, and I'm like, I'm so excited. Like this is I put my 2-week notice in, this is good. I go to bed, and I have a hard time sleeping. And I wake up the next day, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I blew it. I probably should have not sent that email, especially since I didn't ask God first, right? So I sent another email. Hey, please forgive me. I'd like to have my job back, right? So I did quit my job for 1 day. She luckily gave me my job back, but I had to sign an agreement saying that in the next year I wouldn't be stupid and, quit my job again. So I ended up staying for another, I think, 2.5 years before I finally did get a teaching job. But I was ready to do what I wanted to do because I thought, especially during COVID, I was a tutor and I was making some good money as a tutor, right? And that's before all the other tutors caught on and said, hey, we can make bank tutoring during COVID, right? So I was making bigger paychecks tutoring than I was at my actual job. And so that's why I thought, this is going to be a great idea. But it wasn't what God wanted me to do. I decided to take matters into my own hands. And that's exactly what Abraham did. And it caused some problems, right? For me, it caused me to have to grovel for my job back. Please, I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I blame it on the medicine, but I don't take any. Anyway, but this, again, is just one example that we see. We can see this multiple times throughout the Old and New Testament, really. If you look at, you don't have to flip to all these other ones. I'll just kind of throw them out there. In Numbers 20, God tells Moses to speak to the rock and that water would come forth. Well, Moses at this point has already gotten tired of these people. They're complaining all the time. They're wishing they were back in Egypt. All this type of stuff is happening. And they're grumbling again, and he gets frustrated. And instead of speaking to the rock as he was told to, he takes his staff and knocks it. Water still flows. God still brought the blessing. But if you read the rest of Numbers 20, this was like the final straw. This is the one that prevented Moses from going into the promised land because he took matters into his own hands. Right? We got plenty of other illustrations here. In 2 Chronicles chapter 16, King Asa is suffering from a severe foot disease. But instead of going to God, he decides he's going to go to the physicians. Because, doctors know more than God, right? And he takes matters into his own hands. Doesn't live. Ends up dying from this disease. In Joshua chapter 9, without seeking God, Joshua accepts the Gibeonites as he makes an agreement with them. Yeah, you guys can hang out with us. But if he had sought God and obeyed what God was saying, he wouldn't have made the mistake. It was a good idea. It was not a God idea. But he made it into a God idea by saying, oh yeah, come on. It's all good. And ruined it, right? I mean, this was supposed to be one of the other nations that they were supposed to take out because they were a sinful nation. In Judges chapter 4, Barak is another example. It's prophesied by Deborah, the prophetess, that you can go in, you're going to take the land. You're going to take out the king and all that's going to be good. And he gets scared and he says, oh, well, but I like the idea of going, but I really don't want to go unless you go with me. And it changes the story. Because instead of Barak having the joys of battle there and the victories and all, Deborah says, hey, it's going to go to a woman. You lost it. And if you read the story, the king runs into the tent of Jael. And he's like, oh, I'm so thirsty. I just need some water. And she says, here, go ahead and take a nap. I'm going to bring you some warm milk. Right? And so as he's sleeping, this is one of my favorite stories. I know it's gruesome, but I love this story. But as he's sleeping, she takes a tent peg, knocks it into his temple. The woman got the victory. It could have been Barak's, but because he wanted to do it his way and not God's way, he lost the blessing. Right? All right, I'll give you a couple more here. I got one more for you. How about Jonah? Same thing. Jonah, all he had to do was go to Nineveh. But he decided to go the opposite direction. Got on a boat going exactly the opposite direction, and then has to spend a couple days in the belly of a fish as a result of his disobedience. Right? All right, so go back to the story I told you about the guy. Whose song do you think that is? All right, I'll give you a hint. He did it his way. Frank Sinatra, My Way. He hated that song because of how it made him look. But you know what's an interesting thing? Is that we, for some reason, we love singing that song when it comes to obedience. Right? Oh, God, that's a good idea, but that's not my way. I'd rather do it my way. Because for some reason, again, we think that our way is better than God's. All he's asking us to do is to be obedient and follow him. Hear his voice. Okay, I got that. I heard what you said. But the following piece, a little hard. I think I'm going to just do it my way. Right? All right. Now here's one of the greatest illustrations. Go with me, if you will. We're going to park here for a second. Go to 1 Samuel. We're going to start in chapter 13. I'm going to pick up in verse 8. Saul waited there 7 days for Samuel, as Samuel had instructed him earlier, but Samuel didn't come. Saul realized that his troops were rapidly slipping away, so he demanded, "Bring me the burnt offering and the peace offerings." And Saul sacrificed the burnt offering himself. Just as Saul was finishing with the burnt offering, Samuel arrived. Saul went out to meet and welcome him, but Samuel said, "What is this that you have done?" Saul replied, "I saw my men scattering from me, and you didn't arrive when you said you would, and the Philistines are in Michmash, ready for battle. So I said, the Philistines are ready to march against us at Gilgal, and I haven't even asked for the Lord's help. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering for myself before you came." "How foolish," Samuel explained. "You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. Had you kept it, the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom must end, for the Lord has sought out a man after his own heart. The Lord has already appointed him to be the leader of the people because you have not kept the Lord's command." Saul was not in the position to be priest. He was the king. He did not have the rights to do the sacrifices that Samuel, the priest, the judge, the prophet, would have had. He takes matters into his own hands, and as a result, your family line will not sit on this throne again. But God gives Saul a second chance. And if you flip over then to chapter 15, now Saul has been given the order that he's supposed to take out the Amalekites. Every piece of it. Don't keep their spoils, don't keep their animals, don't keep anybody alive. You kill and you burn everything. Well, let's just take a look here at what Saul does. Starting in verse 10 of chapter 15. Then the Lord said to Samuel, "I am sorry that I ever made Saul king, for he has not been loyal to me and has refused to obey my command." Samuel was so deeply moved when he heard this that he cried out to the Lord all night. Early the next morning, Samuel went to find Saul. Someone told him Saul went to the town of Carmel to set up a monument to himself. Then he went on to Gilgal. So Samuel finally found him. When Samuel finally found him, Saul greeted him cheerfully. "May the Lord bless you," he said. "I have carried out the Lord's command." Verse 14. "Then what is the bleating of sheep and goats and the lowing of cattle I hear?" Samuel demanded. "It's true that the army spared the best of the sheep, goats, and cattle," Saul admitted, "but they were going to sacrifice them to the Lord your God." Notice it's your God, not my God. "To the Lord your God. We have destroyed everything else." Then Samuel said to Saul, "Stop. Listen to what the Lord told me last night." "What did he tell you?" And Samuel told him, "Although you may think little of yourself, you are not the leader of the tribes of Israel. The Lord has anointed you king of Israel, and the Lord sent you on a mission and told you, 'Go and completely destroy the sinners,' the Amalekites, 'until they are dead.' Why haven't you obeyed the Lord? Why did you rush for the plunder and do what was evil in the Lord's sight?" "But I did obey the Lord," Saul insisted. "I carried out the mission he gave me. I brought back King Agag, but I destroyed everyone else. Then my troops brought in the best of the sheep, goats, cattle, and plunder to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal." But Samuel replied, "What is more pleasing to the Lord, your burnt offerings and sacrifices, or your obedience to his voice?" We should maybe park there for a second. What is more pleasing to the Lord, your burnt offerings and sacrifices, or your obedience to his voice? Listen, obedience is better than sacrifice, and submission is better than offering the fat of rams. Rebellion is as sinful as witchcraft, and stubbornness as bad as worshiping idols. So because you have rejected the command of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. And if you move over into chapter 16, David gets anointed. It does not take long at all, right? Again, Saul decided he was going to do it his way because it was better. And notice how in both cases he blamed somebody else. "Oh, Samuel, you didn't show up in time, so I felt like I had to do it my way." And this time here, "Oh yeah, I kept the king, but the guys, they did everything else." Take responsibility for yourself, Saul. Saul, you were told what to do. You can't blame shift this one. You chose not to obey. And as the king, he should have been the one saying, "No, don't bring all that good stuff here. We were told to take everything out." And he should have obeyed himself and killed Agag himself. But many times I find that I, for some reason, think that I know a little bit more than God. I don't know where I get this idea from. But I know it's not true. And obviously we see in here, there is no blessing that came from Saul's disobedience. There's no blessing that came from him doing things his way. In fact, if you look at the end of Saul's life, again, Saul was asked to take out all the Amalekites. Who did Saul die from? It was an Amalekite that came and finished the job when Saul said, "Hey, please help me." The Amalekite came and told David what had happened. And David says, "How do you know this?" "Well, because I was the guy holding the sword." An Amalekite took King Saul out. And he should have been the one that took the Amalekites out. So nothing good comes from doing things our way. But again, I told you that 90% of the time I do it one of two ways. That's just one of the other ways. The other way is me questioning God, saying, "You want me to do what?" So when I was a kid, about 12 years old or so, my mom, instead of going and having fun in summer, my mom said, "Hey, there's a church camp meeting. You're coming." Right? So here I am in the middle of the day. All my friends are having, parties. This is when Nintendo first came out. So they're all playing on video games. That's how old I am. And so here I am at church. Right? Yay. Thanks, Mom. And it wasn't just like an hour-long meeting. These were the all-day camp meetings. So we'd go to church at 9 o'clock, and you'd be lucky if you got out by 2. And then you had to come back again at 5 o'clock at night. So here I am at church. And Spirit's moving, things are happening, and these two prophets begin prophesying over people. And I got called up, right? And I'm young, right? I got called up, and they started prophesying over me about things that God was going to use me to do. And then the pastor gets up and he says, hey, wait, before you go back to your seat, Daniel, I want you to pray for every man in this church. And I thought, what? Like I'm 11, 12 years old. I don't know all these fancy prayers and all this type stuff. And so he has all the men come up and they put their feet on the edge of the stage here because I was short, right? So there's a little bit of a boost there for me. But he says, just go down the row, and as God directs you, just pray for these people. And so here I am, again thinking, you want me to do what? And I'm praying for people, and things begin to happen, right? And I'm like, okay, I was reluctant, but God is using me. I was for a minute there, I thought God was smoking the wacky tobacco. But it ends up that he had some kind of plan for me. Sometimes, and this is where God's grace comes in, because sometimes I do ask the question, you want me to do what? But when I get past that initial part of reluctance and actually do what God is asking me to do, I find the blessing. It's a little bit delayed, but I find that there was a reason, there was a method that he was asking me, that he was asking me to follow him in, that I wasn't so sure about, right? Because I didn't see the food dish right away, right? It was maybe hiding around the corner there, but there was a blessing there. All I had to do was follow the clicker and come to him, and it would have been great. Here's some examples, though, of people in the Bible. Abraham. Again, he could have said, you want me to do what with Isaac? You want me to kill him? Now, he's a good example. We already talked about him. But sometimes I question, even though the Bible doesn't say he said that, did he actually say that? I don't know. Again, we have the Hineni, so I'm guessing probably not. But if I was in his shoes, I probably would have said that. Right? All right, Ezekiel 4 through 6. And again, you don't have to turn to these. I'm going to hit these really quick. Ezekiel's told that for 390 days, lay on your side. This is part of this prophetic judgment that is coming over Israel and Judah. So lay on your side. Oh, and by the way, I want you to cook all your meat over human dung. I would have been saying, you want me to do what? Right? And I think to some extent, he probably did. Because he does get to change it to cow dung. Right? But the initial piece was human dung. I might have to draw the line there, God. Sorry. What about in Acts chapter 9, verse 12? We see that Ananias is supposed to go and pray for Saul. And Ananias knew who Saul was. And so, maybe there was that little, you want me to do what? Pray for the guy who's actually got papers to kill all the people who are following Christ? Are you sure? Hosea, I want you to go out and marry a harlot. You want me to do what? I mean, she might have STDs, God. Right? I don't know what's going on over there, but you want me to marry a harlot? Naaman. I like this guy. All right, go with me to 2 Kings 5. This story I think we need to read. All right, so to set the stage, Naaman has leprosy, and he gets letters from the king to go and search out the prophet. And so if we pick it up in verse 9 of chapter 5, it says, so Naaman went with his horses and chariots and waited at the door of Elisha's house. But Elisha sent a messenger out to him with this message, go and wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River, then your skin will be restored and you will be healed of your leprosy. But Naaman became angry and stalked away. I thought he would certainly come out to meet me, he said. I expected him to wave his hand over the leprosy and call on the name of the Lord his God to heal me. Aren't the rivers in Damascus and Abana and the Pharpar better than any of the rivers in Israel? Why shouldn't I wash in them and be healed? So Naaman turned and went away in a rage. Again, it was almost as if he was saying, you want me to do what? You realize that Jordan River is dirty. Like back where I'm from, we call that a mud puddle, right? And you want me to go dip in this mud puddle, not just one time, and not just my little toe, but you want me to dip my whole body in 7 times? You want me to do what? Now notice that he did get the healing with the prompting of his servant. Look, he told you to do it 7 times. Just get down there and do it. He finally got the healing, but his response wasn't, let's do it. It was, huh? Say what? It delayed his blessing a little bit. He had to get past himself. And that's really what it comes down to. When we're asking God, you want me to do what? It's because we have some kind of a pride or selfish issue that is blocking us from just simply being obedient. Again, he's got the clicker. And on the other end of that clicker is the food. Why are we so concerned that we're not going to get fed or that our way is better when all he is saying is, obey me. Just follow what I'm asking you to do. Jennifer Dukes Lee, when I was studying for the book that I wrote on this, I found this comment. And this is one that in the last couple of days, again, as I've been I'm rereading my own book, right? I'm like, this is actually pretty good. I'm getting ministered to. But Jennifer Dukes Lee says, we are in charge of obedience. God is in charge of the results. You know, that maybe I need to put that on my fridge or something, because that helps me to understand, hey, my job is not to worry about what God is doing behind the scenes. My job is to simply do what he's telling me to do. As hard as that might be, as crazy as it might seem, that's all I'm supposed to do, is obey. So, again, looking back at our first verse in John, my sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me. If my response is to do it my way, or what, again, I'm going to either delay or miss out on a blessing. As I said, 9 times out of 10, my cat came running, but 9 times out of 10, I use the other 2 reasonings, answers, when I'm responding to God. But my question goes back to all of us. And again, like I said, I'm not pointing fingers at you. This message is as much for me today as it was 2 years ago, and as much as it'll be probably 3 years from now. Which one am I going to be when God speaks? When I hear his voice, am I going to be quick to obey? Am I going to say, good idea, but I'm going to do it my way? Or am I going to be, you want me to do what? Which one are you going to be? So here's my challenge for you. And I'm not saying a lifetime, that would be great, but let's start small, right? A habit is built by starting small. I can't look at a year from now and expect to be done with these things or rich and all if I'm not taking the steps that I need to take for this day or this week. So I'm going to give you a week-long challenge here. When you hear God's voice, make a point to obey him without question and without delay, doing it his way instead of inserting your way. God speaks to us. We all agreed to it at the very beginning. So when he speaks this week and he nudges you, however he chooses to nudge you and speak to you, this week alone, make your answer, Haneni. Here I am, ready to listen, ready to respond, ready to obey. I don't know what you're going to ask me to do, God, but I'm putting myself in a position where I say, here I am. And then watch what happens. Knowing, again, he is not, as the good shepherd, he's not going to lead you off the cliff. Listen for those little sounds, those clicks, those words, and let yourself be steered in those directions, knowing, again, you're not going to go off the cliff. You're going to go exactly where he needs you to be for that exact moment and that exact purpose. All right? All right. So that's my challenge. So let's pray. God, I thank you for the opportunity to come here and share your word. God, I thank you that you're your word is full of so many examples for us to lean on, to see the positives and the negatives of doing or not doing what you ask us to do. God, I pray that this week we would hear your voice like never before. That it would be so obvious. Send the sign, send the song, send the word, send the billboard, send whatever it's going to take. Send your voice in whichever way, and let us hear your voice, God. God, we know that you are the good shepherd. We know that in our brain. But help us to know that in our heart so that we will be those who listen, knowing that you know us, and follow in the direction that you are leading us. As we take on this challenge, God, I pray that we would come back a week from now and we would have the testimonies of what you did simply because we obeyed your voice. Let our response be Haneni. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.